I don't know how to begin this without sounding insane, but maybe that doesn't matter anymore. If you're watching this, it means I survived long enough to tell the story, though survival doesn't mean safety. It's midnight again, and I can feel him getting closer. It all started a few weeks ago, when I moved into the old farmhouse at the edge of town. People had warned me about it. Neighbors avoided talking about the property, and when they did, their voices dropped into a hushed whisper, as if saying too much might summon something. I thought it was just small-town superstition. The rent was cheap, the land was wide open, and I wanted silence. But silence isn't always a gift. The first night, I noticed the air became unnaturally still at exactly midnight. No crickets, no owls, no wind against the shutters. It was as if the world itself held its breath. And then, I heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. I froze. Peeking through the window, I saw a tall, thin silhouette at the edge of the field. He wore a wide, crooked hat, and his body looked wrong, like bones draped in tattered cloth, swaying as if every movement took effort. His eyes, they glowed faintly in the dark. I told myself it was just the reflection of the moon, but deep down I knew better. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, then slowly turned and drifted back into the fog. I barely slept that night. The following evenings, it kept happening, always at midnight. The same silence, the same figure, creeping closer each time. I tried rationalizing it. Maybe it was a local drifter, maybe someone messing with me. But then, I noticed something strange, a burlap sack. He always carried it in his left hand, dragging it behind him. And sometimes I could swear it moved, like something or someone was trapped inside. I started locking every door, every window, pushing furniture against the entrances. But no matter what I did, at midnight the silence would fall, and I'd hear him. Closer. Always closer. One night, I made the mistake of opening the door just a crack, just to prove to myself that it was all in my head. But it wasn't. He was standing at the end of my porch. His hand was long and skeletal, ending in claws that scraped lightly against the wooden railing. His head tilted, as if listening to my heartbeat. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His eyes burned into me like cold fire. And then, just as quickly, he turned and vanished into the mist. I slammed the door and cried until morning. The next day, I went into town to ask questions. Most people ignored me, but one old man finally leaned in close and whispered, "Don't be outside at midnight. Don't let him see you. He takes people at midnight." His voice trembled when he said it, and he wouldn't say another word. I wanted to believe it was just a story. I wanted to believe I was imagining all of it. But then the disappearances started. First a woman down the road, then a farmer's son. No explanation, no signs of struggle, just gone. And now, he's coming for me. They say fear makes you clever. I think it mostly makes you dishonest with yourself. After those disappearances, I started lying. To my friends, to the old man who warned me, and most of all, to my own reflection. I told myself I would leave the farmhouse, that I would drive into town and never look back. But every evening, I found an excuse to stay. The house felt like a wound I hadn't learned to ignore. Leaving felt like tearing the scab open. Midnights multiplied. So did the scratches on the porch rails. They were fine, precise gouges, like talons testing wood for weakness. Sometimes I'd find footprints in the frost that made no sense, too long, too narrow, dragging in a single straight line, as though the thing that left them never lifted its foot. Once, beneath the prints, pressed into the soil, there was a weird, oily residue that smelled faintly of copper, blood and rust, and something older, like the scent of coins in an old pocket. I began setting traps for him, not to kill. I can't even say why. Maybe to prove his existence, maybe to bargain with whatever laws of the world still held. I left lights burning, set a string of bells along the fence, welded a metal bucket that would clang at any touch. Midnight came like a decree. The air smothered sound. The bells remained obediently quiet. The lights guttered like dying candles. Then, in the far distance, the soft scrape of that sack. He changed his pattern. He stopped appearing at the edge of the field and started showing up closer to the house. In the lane, at the shadowed crook of the shed, sometimes just beyond the reach of the porch light, as if he were a stain on the night itself. One evening, I watched him by the window, holding my breath until my lungs burned. He stood beneath the moon, and the sack shifted with a slow, wet sound. For the first time, I could hear muffled movements from inside. A thump, a soft rattle, like bones trying to arrange themselves into speech. That night, I did not sleep. Instead, I stared at the ceiling and listened as the house groaned and settled, waiting for his next visit. At 12:03 a.m., something scratched at the back door. A single, measured claw. I did not move. The scratching became a pattern, 3 scratches, a pause, then 2 more, like a crude Morse code tapping at my sanity. I wanted to open the door and throw that sack into the light to expose whatever hid inside and call the authorities. Instead, I crawled to the kitchen, took the smallest of knives and pressed it into my palm until my knuckles whitened. I told myself it was for protection. I think it was to feel real. When I cracked the door, the breath that hit me was cold and smelled of hay and old smoke. There was no shadow in the doorway, only the nearest field, the moon, and near the fence, the shape of his hat disappearing into the fog. But the sack had been left propped against the step, half in and half out, as if someone had deliberately abandoned it there so I could see it. I flung the sack open. There was nothing human in the bag. No limbs, no face, only fragments, a scrap of hair, a cracked button, a single child's shoe with the initials JR inked inside. My stomach clenched until I thought it would tear. The shoe, that button, memories like loose teeth clicked into place. JR was the farmer's son, the one who had vanished 2 weeks ago. The shoe should have belonged to loved hands, not to a monster's collection. Then I noticed the lining of the sack. Stitched inside, almost like an afterthought, was a small, faded photograph folded in half. I unfolded it with hands that trembled. It was of the farmhouse, my farmhouse, but older, and in the doorway stood a figure I recognized with the heat of guilt. Me. Young, smiling, holding what looked like a sack. My smile in that old photograph was strange. It didn't reach my eyes. Behind me, in the yard, the silhouette of the hat, watching. I don't remember ever taking that picture. I don't remember anyone else standing beside me, but the photograph smelled of smoke and something that tasted like old promises. My throat closed. The air felt thin. The hat's brim crested the fence line, and beneath it, in the wet, moonlit silence, the sack shifted as if something inside had understood I'd seen. The photograph burned in my hand, though it was only paper. My instincts screamed at me to destroy it, to tear it apart and scatter the pieces into the night. But the moment I tried, something inside me froze, like invisible hands had seized my wrists. My breath rattled in my chest. The picture slipped from my grasp and fluttered to the floor, landing face up. The me in the photograph was still smiling. I stumbled backward, my heel catching the edge of the sack. It tipped, spilling its contents in a slow cascade. Buttons, scraps of fabric, locks of hair, tiny keepsakes. Things stolen from people who had simply vanished. My stomach lurched when I noticed a gold ring rolling across the floor until it stopped at my toes. I recognized it instantly. It belonged to Mrs. Harlow, the woman who disappeared 3 nights ago. That's when I heard it. Not the footsteps this time, but the sound of breathing. Heavy, ragged, directly behind the thin wall of my kitchen. I pressed myself against the counter, knife clutched in my hand, listening as claws scraped along the wood. He didn't knock. He didn't call. He simply dragged those fingers across the doorframe, like he was tracing the shape of the house, or measuring it. And then the whisper. It didn't come from outside. It was inside my head. A deep, rasping voice that tasted of rot and soil. You kept the house. You kept the pact. I wanted to scream that I didn't know what he was talking about, but the words wouldn't form. My tongue felt swollen, useless. The air thickened as the lights flickered and died, plunging the room into a darkness so complete it felt alive. Only his eyes remained, 2 pinpoints of pale fire glowing through the thin cracks of the kitchen door. I ran. The farmhouse became a labyrinth of shadows, every hallway stretching longer than it should, the way every door opening to places that didn't exist. I could hear him behind me, not chasing but waiting, like a spider letting me exhaust myself in its web. The photograph kept appearing wherever I turned, on the stairs, pinned to the mirror, pressed against the window glass. Always the same image, me, smiling, the sack at my feet, and that hat looming just behind. I don't remember falling, but suddenly I was on the porch again, moonlight bleeding through the fog. The field was silent, too silent. My chest burned from running, my hands slick with sweat and blood where the knife had cut into my palm. And then I saw him. He stood at the edge of the yard, the sack dragging behind him, eyes fixed on me. He lifted one clawed hand and pointed, not at me, but at the house, at the door I had fled from. Something moved inside, something that wore my face. It stepped into the moonlight, grinning with teeth too sharp, holding the photograph in its hand. I watched, paralyzed, as it crossed the yard and stood beside him, as if it had always belonged there. My double. My replacement. The man in the hat placed the sack in its hands. My reflection looked at me one last time, smiling that wrong smile, and then they both walked into the fog together. I'm still here, but I don't think I escaped. The house feels emptier now, like it's waiting for midnight again. And I can already hear the silence gathering outside, because he doesn't just take people at midnight, he leaves something behind.
Subscribe to Horror Story Bar.